All right, more than 24 Republican governors got together in Orlando this week to talk strategy for the coming year, but only a handful have gone as far as to endorse a presidential candidate. Well, one of them, Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal, is here. He is backing Rick Perry, and we're actually going to have a larger conversation, but I want to start with your backing of Governor Perry. He's struggling right now to get back into the conversation. He's going to actually be on the Tonight Show a little bit later. He didn't get that union leader endorsement in New Hampshire, something a conservative candidate would want to get. What's your advice for Governor Perry at this point in the campaign, Governor Jindal?
Well, bottom line is, I think Rick has got a great record to run on, a great story to tell. Obviously, look, we're not going to have the best debater, the most polished speaker. President Obama is probably one of the best speakers that I've seen in a generation in politics. But I think the American people are tired of the speeches. What they're looking for are results. Rick can run on his record. He's been governor of Texas for nearly 11 years. They've now become the second largest economy in the country. You look at his record. Well, under President Obama, we've lost 2 million jobs. Under Governor Perry, Texas has created 1 million jobs. Nearly 40% of the jobs created in the last couple of years have been in Texas. He has cut taxes now 65 times, $14 billion, revamped the Texas tort system. As a result, got a great economic record that he can run on. He can show that he has delivered results. I think that the challenge for President Obama, he's a great speaker, ran a great campaign 4 years ago. He had never run anything before he became president of the United States. And I think the voters are looking for a candidate with executive experience, with a proven track record. That's what Rick Perry can offer.
Well, right now, Republicans apparently are splitting between, at this point, Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich. And I know the way this race has gone, the one half of that equation seems to change every couple of weeks. But are you comfortable if it does come down to a choice between Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich if Governor Perry doesn't make it into the quote-unquote finals?
Oh, look, absolutely. I'm going to support whoever our nominee is. The bottom line is we need a fundamental course correction in this country. I think this next election will be much more about the direction of our country more than speaking styles or who looks the best in debates. The reality is this. This is one of the most important elections in our lifetimes to ensure that our children have a better quality of life than we've enjoyed. Every generation has left more opportunities for our children. This is what's at stake. Under President Obama, he has grown government spending to 24% of GDP, 3 years in a row of trillion-dollar-plus deficits, $15 trillion accumulated debt, now equal to our GDP. You look at our economic record post-World War II, we're in the worst recession since the Great Depression. We've got to answer a fundamental question. Do we want our government to be permanently larger with higher taxes? Do we want to go the way of Europe? The future, our future, if we continue down this path, all we need to do is look at Greece, Italy. We need to look at the struggling countries within the Eurozone. Or do we want a Republican candidate who knows that we have to cut government spending, we've got to cut the waste, we've got to cut taxes, we've got to grow the private sector to create more good-paying jobs for our children and grandchildren? This election, I think, is going to be a direction, an election about the future direction of our country. It's not going to be about personalities. A lot of the things that seem so important today aren't going to be important a year from now when we're actually focused on the different platforms and the different ideas. This is truly going to be an election about ideas and governing philosophies.
Now, Governor, you brought up the issue of the government spending as a percent of GDP, but revenues as a percent of GDP are at lowest levels in some 60 years, below 15%. That's an issue, too. I mean, is it all spending cuts? You're not for any sort of way to raise revenues, potentially having to increase some amount of taxes that come into the government system. It's one thing to cut, but you can't cut all down if you do a historical average 18%. Don't you need a little bit of both?
Well, 3 things. One, you're absolutely right that revenues are down. The best way to get revenues back up, you look at the independent forecasts like CBO, the best way to get revenues back up to their historic norms is for the economy to be growing again. We're at almost record 9% unemployment rates for extended periods of time. That's the number one reason revenues have fallen. But secondly, I'm certainly in favor of flattening and simplifying and lowering the tax rates, getting rid of a lot of the special treatments and the loopholes in there that would generate economic growth, would generate more revenue. What I'm not for is raising taxes, raising marginal rates. I think that'd be a huge mistake, especially in the middle of this recession. Back in Louisiana, where I'm governor, we've cut government, the budget by 26%. We've cut taxes. We've not raised taxes. As a result, we've actually raised per capita income over the last 4 years, highest ranking we've had in over 80 years. Our unemployment rate has been below the national and southern average every single month. 13 straight months of the private sector job growth. And you see that from other Republican governors across the country. As they've held the line on taxes, as they've cut spending, they've been able to produce record economic growth.
Governor, you have brought up that this is going to be sort of a fight over the economy and the middle class. I want to play for you a clip from President Obama last night and then follow about a briefing you got yesterday at the RGA. Here's what President Obama said last night.
They'll fight with everything they have to protect the tax cuts of the wealthiest Americans, but they've got no problem breaking the oath when it comes to raising taxes on middle-class families, just to score some political points.
Now, Republican pollster Frank Luntz gave you guys a presentation about the Occupy Wall Street movement, and he said one of the things he's seen in this public opinion data is that it's put Republicans on the wrong side, messaging-wise, when it comes to protecting Wall Street versus the middle class. And I believe in his, he said, if next year's campaign is couched as a battle over the middle class, Democrats will win.
A couple of things. One, I think the president, instead of, right now, he's basically campaigning. And I understand he's going to have to do that next year. I'd rather he actually lead. I'd rather he actually be forcing Congress to balance the budget, to cut spending, to actually produce a plan that will grow jobs. He's ignoring the message the voters sent in 2010. He and Senator Reid and the rest of the Democrats in Washington have been ignoring that message. But secondly, look, I don't agree with the tactics or certainly everything the Occupy Wall Street movement stands for, but I do think they're articulating a genuine frustration from hardworking Americans, from tax-paying Americans who may not be out there protesting, but are worried about the future for their children. And that is why I think it is so important that this election be about ideas. And when you look at what governors are doing, governors don't get to print money, borrow money from China. We're having to make tough choices. I was reelected with an historic margin in Louisiana, even after we held the line on taxes, even after we now have the fewest number of state government jobs in over 20 years. We have the highest credit rating we've had in over 25 years. And you're seeing the same kinds of reforms take place in Indiana, in Mississippi, in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and a lot of other states with conservative governors. Third point, though, is that, look, the Republican Party has always stood for upward mobility, for creating opportunities where any child can pursue the American dream. Doesn't matter what your last name is, doesn't matter if you were born into a wealthy family or not, and that's what frightens the American people so much right now. They're worried if we don't fix this, if we don't cut and stop government from growing and taking over health care and all these other things, that our children aren't going to have that same chance to pursue the American dream. That's what our party has to remind voters we stand for.
All right, Governor, I know we have a hard out here in less than a minute, so I'm going to leave it there. Republican Governor Bobby Jindal from Louisiana. Governor, thanks for coming on this morning.
Thanks, Chuck.